Cheryl Mitchell, the president of Treleven. We're a retreat and learning center here in Addison County that looks at issues at the intersection of spirit, nature, and social justice. And it's been my pleasure to be interviewing people in our community who are making a huge difference. And today we'll be talking with Emily Joselson and Andy Nagy-Benson, who have been really the leaders in the community conversations. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Maybe you could just start, one of you, by telling us what are the community conversations and why are you making them available to us?
So I remember how disorienting it was after the 2016 presidential election, and how concerned I and so many other people were with the policy changes with the new administration, and in particular the immediate talk about a Muslim ban. And around that time, within a few weeks of the election, I ran into Andy at the Burlington International Airport. We both happened to be traveling to North Carolina for work, and sort of commiserated with each other and determined that we wanted to try to do something about it. And somehow quickly started a discussion that what might help would be to create a forum in the community where we started to talk about some of these issues, since it was on so many people's minds and there was such a lot of distress. And we thought that if we couldn't start having civil conversations about these issues in our little community, then it would be pretty hard to imagine them happening anywhere.
Yeah.
So it was clear that the first one should be something about the Muslim ban, and so that's where we went. We reached out to members of the community who were either Muslim or had some relationship to the issue, and convened a panel discussion, and people were so hungry to gather and express feelings and concerns and support that it was obvious that we were meeting a need.
Yeah. And how did you develop? It hasn't all been focused on the Muslim ban. You've changed and offered new things. How do you decide what you're doing, and what have you offered to the community?
I think that the campaign before the presidential election surfaced a lot of hard social issues, which I think culminated in the topics of actually many of the different community conversations: anti-Semitism, the Muslim ban, immigration. It was almost like look at the headlines of the week or month and say, boy, we need to talk about this as a community. These are hard issues. We were not seeing very good role models on the national level of talking across issues from different sides of an issue. And I think we both thought that it was really possible to do in Middlebury. And I think that's proven to be true. It's been very civil and informative. And people keep coming.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're both from somewhat different religious backgrounds, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and how you've widened that net to people in other religions? Or
Sure.
So I've been active in Addison County's Jewish community for decades, Havara, and was so touched and overwhelmed with the community support after there was an anti-Semitic graffiti on the door of Havara House, also shortly after the election. And so, like many things in Addison County, as you well know, there's always been a good history of communicating across various lines.
Yeah.
The social service community has modeled that for decades, and the interfaith community in the county as well. So it seemed natural with the outpouring of interfaith support to Havara that it made sense to enlist not only the religious communities, but also other civic organizations interested in these issues.
Yeah, and I'm a Protestant Christian pastor. I was ordained 20 years ago. I've served churches in New England, and I've been here for 9 years, just just began my 10th year. So, but as a member of the United Church of Christ, that denomination has a very deep commitment to interfaith conversation and learning, relationship building within the community, regardless of religious affiliation or no affiliation. So, really, Emily and I, we met on the Teen Center board. Emily recruited me onto that, and that was an easy recruitment because I love youth, and I always have worked directly with them. So that's where we met. We worked together on that board, and then we both went off the board, but just sort of ran into each other from time to time, and then ran into each other in that airport. Then that's where it started.
And you've also been instrumental in your church becoming much more open to the community for other events, not just for church events. I guess I know it through the community suppers. And
yes. Yeah, well, thank you for your
there.
work with that. The church was open to community groups in that way. The community suppers predates my arrival. But I like to think, and I hope anyway, that our building is more and more used by members of the community. And I think that's certainly true now that the church has a new addition. Different community groups, civic groups, really whoever can use that space for virtually nothing. And that was kind of one of the main ideas of that whole project, was to make a community space that was available to everyone in the town. So that's happening. It makes me happy.
Yeah. I'm just curious, as the two of you have shaped this, I was very struck. I went to the Debbie Irving workshop yesterday, and your opening comments, and especially as you were talking about everybody's safe here.
Yeah.
As you've done these conversations about difficult things, have there been times that people have not felt safe? What else do you do to make sure that they're civil, or that people feel supported or listened to?
Well, Andy always makes, at some point in the opening remarks, a reminder that this is a safe and civil and respectful space. There have been some topics where, with or without complete reason, we've had sort of occasion to be concerned for people's safety when we were doing the panel on migrant justice, and had invited several of the farm workers from the county and several farmers. We wanted to make sure that we understood what the law was with regard to any potential visits from ICE.
Right.
When we had our panel on sort of issues surrounding gun control, we wanted to make sure that we all were safe there. And also we had some concerns around other panels, including the anti-Semitism panel. I think at times you may have gotten some emails or calls that caused additional concern.
Yeah, it was before the migrant worker. There was a call that was pretty hateful, just the day, it was either the day before or the day of that event, and there was a lot of talk about ICE being in the area, and that was kind of crazy. But yeah, there have been calls to the police department in advance of some of those conversations, knowing that they were kind of hot and charged nationally, and they were respectful. They were very responsive. They were, in some cases would do a lap around the block in their cars, and we just felt like these conversations are really supposed to be community building events, relationship building events. Let's talk like grown-ups about some things that are difficult and complex.
So talk more, because you were both on the Teen Center board, and the conversations around gun control, and then the students for not just gun control, but also for some of the environmental issues, being involved in starting their own demonstrations of the things that they cared about. How do all these things interrelate?
It's pretty organic and not particularly organized in any top-down kind of way. As longtime members of the community, we sort of reach out to people that we know, and that often leads to people that we don't know so well, or people that other people know. And so we've always had just, really amazing and generous folks who have been willing to appear on challenging issues, on panels on challenging issues, and take, take responsibility for sharing their opinions in ways that maybe is slightly outside their comfort zones, but I think that over time it's continued to be a safe space.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we yearn for is an increasingly diverse audience, so that we really can widen the conversation and bring in a variety of perspectives. I think we're still learning how to do that, and how to do that well.
What are your thoughts? How are you trying to do that?
Although there have been plenty of comments or questions that indicate a variety of opinions among panel members and audience members, for the most part, I think the divergence of views is within a sort of shorter spectrum rather than the widest possible spectrum of views. And I think we're still trying to figure out how to, we've explored whether it's location, whether it's topic, whether it's, who we are, how to bring in a true divergence of views, where people feel comfortable coming into the space, and somehow we can model how to do that safely and respectfully.
Yeah. I know after the Debbie Irving workshop, there are going to be smaller discussion groups here at the library. Is that something that you do each time?
No, this will be the first time we do that. That was a good idea that actually came from some friends and partners at the college. So that was Renee Wells, who came up with that idea, which was lovely. And we could have done it, I guess, for other topics. One thing I would want to point out is that whether it was youth involvement on the panels or college professors or community leaders, I haven't done the math, but there have to be 60, 70 panelists over the last couple of years. And that says a lot about where we live and the kind of community where we live. These are very, and some very courageous people in the sense that they're going to be standing or sitting in front of a room of people sharing their experiences and views, but they're also incredibly articulate, gifted people who have enriched these conversations. I mean, Emily and I, we get some credit, I suppose, for just
administrative.
We're sort of leading the charge in a way, but it's the panelists up, and it was Debbie Irving yesterday who brought such a rich perspective, and all of the panelists have. So you just do that math, and cumulatively, this whole enterprise, I think, has been a good thing for where we live, our whole community. And I credit the panelists who say yes. I will be on that panel, and then come and share from their heart and from their experience. That means a lot, and I think that's why people come, just to expand their own perspectives and worldviews
and listen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the Debbie Irving's presentation, Debbie Irving, who wrote "Waking Up White," about white privilege, and whose book and whose presentation yesterday comes from such a personal perspective of sharing her own journey of discovery about issues related to white supremacy, and the fact that so many of the foundational institutions in our culture in this country are built on what we come to learn, what we gradually come to learn the more we study, very racist bases. And so I think the presentation yesterday was a newer one for us. It wasn't a panel. It was sort of a professional who agreed to come and engage the community in this sort of workshop model where we were all encouraged to read the book, and to do some deep thinking and deep listening in response to what she was saying, and then to talk amongst ourselves in a way that we haven't done as much in prior panels.
True.
And her return workshop in January 27th, Sunday, January 27th, will be even more of that, encouraging us to go deeper. And since it's such a challenging issue for all of us, wherever you are on the journey of discovery in that, it made these debriefing sessions that are happening this week at the library extra important.
I'm remembering our first community conversation, I'm not even sure we called it that yet, was at the library.
Right.
It was in the downstairs in the community room. We offered a documentary called 13th, which has to do with race inequalities in our nation's history. And I think it's interesting that yesterday's was really around the same topic. And I feel, anyway, speaking only for myself, that we were almost given a charge yesterday by our workshop facilitator, Debbie Irving, to take this and run and keep going, because there's an awful lot of work around understanding white privilege and racism in general. I know there is in my own life, and I know I was in a room of people who were pretty much in that neighborhood. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in these next several months, but I wouldn't be surprised if we just keep with this for a little while longer. I think our community responded very well to this workshop yesterday in attendance on a really lousy weather day.
Right.
So we'll see. I think there's so much more to do. And I feel really invigorated and energized to do it.
And also, there's obviously such a wide range of people's personal understanding and personal responses to the issue of racism. And the responses that people have to the Black Lives Matter movement, and how many different places people come from in responding to that. And I think it would be really amazing for us to be able to explore that, continue to explore that, the issues of racism and white privilege and white fragility around issues of racism, with increasingly diverse audiences. So we can really get a lot of shared perspectives and joint exploration and joint learning.
I mean, it sounds like this is at the top of your interest areas right now. I feel like I've known you for many years, and anything that's needed to change, you've been the person, one of the people involved in really working on that. The Human Rights Commission and the Parent-Child Center and the Teen Center, the Hunger Council. And I'm just curious about if you had one or two desires, you've raised your family here, about how this community might change.
So, you sort of forget in a lot of decades the various community opportunities for involvement. But my own journey in learning more about racism is really pretty new. And Debbie Irving's topic yesterday, "I'm a good person, isn't that enough?" was sort of the way I started. And it's particularly challenging in a very white community, in a very white state, to be moved to do a lot of exploration. But I'm feeling, and I think once you start learning about the issues and realize that racism isn't most productively discussed as something that used to be but is no longer, or if it does still exist, it exists somewhere else, and that that if you are a good person, then you can't be racist. I think all of those presumptions in myself are starting to dissolve, and it's hard for me to imagine. I mean, poverty and economic inequality all certainly play into access to justice issues. And as a lawyer, that's, one of my sort of lifelong most important topics. And so the more I learn about unequal access to justice or unequal treatment in our justice system, it hits particularly close to home. So that's, I think, where I want to focus a lot of my efforts going forward.
And how about for you, Andy? I don't know as much about your background in this community. What drew you to this community? Did you raise a family here? Any of those things? Actually?
Yeah, my wife Gwen and I have 3 daughters, and We moved up here when our oldest daughter was in 4th grade, and our youngest one was just a baby.
Yeah.
So this is their hometown as far as they know. So yeah, I haven't been here nearly as long as Emily or you, but I do feel a rootedness here, and I've been welcomed very warmly here. I'm always going to be an advocate for youth and young adults. That's a huge part of what I do at the church, and it's just it's been a passion of mine for a long time. And like Emily, I think this issue of looking at my own white privilege. I grew up in a town, Simsbury, Connecticut, which was affluent white suburb of Hartford, and I didn't think about the kinds of topics that we were talking about yesterday around white privilege and race. And for me, really since the last summer when I read Debbie Irving's book, that it just keeps coming around and around and around, and I'm paying attention to that, and I'm reflecting on it and reading a lot, trying to educate myself, and I have a million miles to go. I feel like I'm I'm still in the starting gate, but I have a deep desire to get real about that issue and help, to the extent that I'm able, help bring people into that conversation. That's all.
And are you coming at it from a different, Emily said she was coming at it from sort of a social justice, she's a lawyer, an equity, poverty issue, or are you coming at it from the same place?
No, well, social justice for sure, but obviously as a pastor, I come at it from a theological point of view, and there's plenty of theology to back up what we're doing. Bringing community together, talking about it, building relationships for the good of all people, for the common good. So that's those dots are pretty easy to connect from a theological posture. So that's definitely where I come from.
And one of the things that came up yesterday is that within religious, sort of institutions, there's been some challenging history.
Oh yeah.
And in this country and internationally, having to do with racial inequality and other kinds of equity issues. So there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of growing and understanding to be gained.
I'm curious how you both sort of started this in the wake of the 2016 elections and wondering what you could do about that, and this is a very focused on this community, or it seems like the discussions have been. What do you see as, how is it spreading, or is it spreading? Is it just, are these conversations that are just helping us to understand, or are they having an impact?
I have two comments. One is that these community conversations are happening around the country. There was actually an article a couple of years back in a pretty popular mainline Protestant magazine called Christian Century about just this, about community conversations. So that's just, I'm pretty aware of that. Those are happening elsewhere. I don't know. I mean, I think, that's where I would stop, I guess. So this is part of a larger constellation, for sure. And
I've heard a lot of people say, and have been in a lot of discussions with people around the fact that the sort of heightened level of civil discourse and civil disagreement on issues is prompting people to explore ways to talk about stuff that they haven't talked about before, to be aware of issues that they hadn't really known were issues before. So I think that impetus is happening all over, and that's the itch we're trying to scratch.
And I think I was also, I guess my other thought was that back around the election and the months following, I didn't know what to do on a national level. I mean, I could march, but I didn't know how to affect change on a national level. But just based on relationships I have within this community, including this one, that I feel like we could get a toehold here and move and sort of pursue those interests locally. And I think I still feel that way. Not that we can't be in conversation with our legislators in Washington, and I think we need to be, but this is where we live. These are our neighbors, and we need to learn how to live together.
And we've been, not that we have illusions about who's watching, but exploring how to model those conversations.
Well, I know that there are lots of people in the community that are just grateful because you don't often have opportunities to learn from each other. You don't have opportunities to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable, to talk about issues that are a little bit uncomfortable. And so you and your panelists and your workshop leaders have really, I think, provided an amazing gift to people. I'm also realizing that we're going to run out of time. I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to say. And I think I heard yesterday that the library has a lot of resources about the kinds of issues that you've been addressing in the community conversations. So we'll send our viewers to the library too.
Chris Kirby has been making sure that the books available and the other resources available are easily accessed by library users, and the Vermont Bookshop has copies of Debbie's book.
I was browsing the library before this show, and I was pleased to see how many books were out actually on the counters and displayed around these issues that we've had conversations about as a community. So the library is one of our partners that was named yesterday, and that's kind of cool. There's a network of partnerships that are forming based on what topics we're covering month to month, and I think that's just neat to be a part of. I enjoy that.
And of course, the newspaper has been a great partner, and Angelo Lynn's editorial about this issue in last week's paper was really invaluable.
Yeah. Well, I so much appreciate both of you coming and talking today, and would just like to suggest to anybody who's watching that if you have an issue that you would like to explore, either bring it to the studio here and you can do it live and have it taped. Maybe call Emily or Andy and say, hey, this is another issue that really we should be talking about. Their contact information will come up in a minute. And it's very nice to be watching these growing partnerships across the different institutions in our community. So I know we're all very grateful to both of you for being here today.
Thanks, Cheryl,
Thank
for all
you.
the work you do.
Thank you very much.